Hi everyone, today I'm going to be talking about bias, and what you need to know is that bias is just a way of saying your data may not be representative of the truth about what a population may think about something. If you don't know what bias is for the AP Statistics exam, you will die, so it's very important to learn this, alright? Bias usually occurs when there's some error in your procedure, or in the way you ask people for information, or in the way that your study was set up. So it's important to learn what kind of biases there are. First one's voluntary response. It's just like what it sounds, right? Voluntary response bias occurs when you ask people to give their responses instead of you selecting people from a population to give their responses to you. Because if you put it upon the people in a population to give their responses, only the people with strong opinions are going to bother to give their responses, because only people with strong opinions are going to have the time to fill out the piece of paper or write the letter or make a note and send it in to you about what they think, right? I mean, if you don't care about a subject, you're not going to bother to give a response. So let's say you're a radio station or a magazine, right? And you send out this letter or a note or an ad saying, what do you think about the latest iPhone? Well, naturally, only people who really, really have some beef with Apple or really love the iPhone are going to bother to send in their responses. And because of that, you're going to have data that isn't necessarily accurate of everyone. It's only going to represent what those really strong-minded individuals think. Moving on to the next bias. Oh yes, this is key. Self-selection. See if I can get a pen out here. Self-selection. Like I said, voluntary self-selection. If people choose to give their own responses instead of the researcher selecting people beforehand, only the strong-minded people are going to respond. Moving on to convenience sampling. This is just when you're lazy, when a researcher is lazy, and he decides to just ask only some people instead of doing it fairly and running a proper procedure, right? So, to give you an example, let's say you wanted to figure out what people thought of the food in the cafeteria. Well, let's say you just leave the survey sheets right in front of the lunch line counter. Alright, first of all, only the people who buy lunch are going to be able to bought lunch on that day are going to be able to offer their opinion. So you've already left a big population, maybe the student body, out who eats at the cafeteria. Because if they don't buy lunch that day, they're not going to be included in the sample. So convenience sampling occurs when you avoid, really doing the procedure correctly and only ask people who are easy to ask. So stopping only the friendly-looking people in the mall, that'd be pretty stupid. Or leaving cards at a restaurant table, right? I mean, instead of you going up to people and asking for their information, leaving it there, is that really going to make sure people give their information? No. And just think, does this sampling procedure sound lazy? And if it does, you probably have an issue with convenience sampling bias. So remember, convenience sampling bias is when you only ask the people who are easy to ask. Produces biased results. Yes, moving on. Undercoverage bias is when you, not by necessarily your own intent, but through your procedure, you leave out a certain group of a population whose information you need. So I'll just go straight to the example for this one. Let's say you select names out of a phone book for example, right? Well, not everyone is necessarily listed in the phone book. If you I'm sure if you pulled out a phone book of Washington, D.C., Barack Obama's phone number would not be in there, but still he needs to be part of the sample because he is a resident of Washington, D.C. Then again, there are some really poor people in Washington, D.C., and they might not have phone numbers either, so they're not going to be listed, but yet they're still part of the population of Washington, D.C. And then there are young people who just don't have landlines. Well, they still need to be included too, because they are part of the population of Washington, D.C. So just using a phone book from Washington, D.C. would leave out all of these people, and your responses, your information would only include the people who had landlines and were in the phone book. So you're leaving out the people, which makes undercoverage bias. Non-response bias, this one's really easy. It generally always happens in the same way. You're a telemarketer, right? You pick up the phone, but the people you pick up and you get hung up on, right? Because of that, now you don't have their information and you get no response from them. It's a big problem. If people don't respond, you can't get their information. Only the people who respond to the information will be represented, and you have bias. And the last one I want to talk about is response bias. This one's really easy. If a police officer asks students at a school, do you smoke pot, are they going to give you a truthful answer? No. And so because they don't give you a truthful answer, you're not going to get accurate data.